Animal shelters across the United States are overfilled. The dogs that are at shelters are often strays or dogs that owners couldn't keep because of financial issues, health issues, or the move to a new place that does not permit specific breeds or does not permit dogs over a certain weight. However, some dogs are more likely to get adopted than others. Pit bulls take 3 times longer to get adopted compared to other dogs and are in turn more likely to be euthanized. However, research indicates that on average, pit bulls have higher temperament scores compared to most popular dog breeds. Contributing factors that lead to this stem from the human processes involved when searching for a dog to adopt. Specifically, it is the intersection of confirmation bias, the halo effect, and the fundamental attribution error. Most people attempt to make informed decisions prior to obtaining a canine companion. This decision-making process often involves breed selection, which is often influenced by physical appearance, coat type, predispositions to health ailments, perceived energy levels, and temperament. Furthermore, this decision-making process may include age, size, sex, and where the dog is coming from. Despite looking at fundamental factors that aim to determine desirability and compatibility, confirmation bias can warp this process such that individuals are no longer making an informed decision. Confirmation bias is a mental shortcut that influences human perception. Specifically, it is the inclination to pursue or overweigh evidence that aligns with one's own beliefs, while avoiding or underweighing evidence that contradicts it. In the context of the early stages of the decision-making process, people will search for which dog breeds have certain characteristics or search for particular dog breeds to investigate which breeds have desirable characteristics. While searching for information, people may search for and emphasize the positive qualities of the breeds that were already of interest, and not seek out other information about those breeds or view new information that does not align with pre-existing beliefs as less important. When people decide that a specific breed meets all the desirable criteria, the breed is often chosen. Once people make a choice, new information is less likely to influence that choice. Even if people continue to search for information, research indicates that if confidence in the choice is high, people are more likely to sample information about the chosen option, which reinforces the original decision. Confirmation bias during the search process for breed selection prevents certain dog breeds from being considered, and creates a high demand for particular dog breeds or designer dogs. Popular dog breeds such as poodles, poodle mixes, golden retrievers, and labs are some of the most sought-out dog breeds. One reason for this is that these dog breeds are typically classified as being intelligent, friendly, and having a good temperament. However, the most popular dog breeds are not the only dog breeds that have these characteristics. For example, research showed that bull-type terriers, which includes pit bulls, scored higher in human sociability than golden retrievers, Labrador retrievers, and poodles. Despite this, stereotypes about certain dog breeds persist, and the high demand for certain breeds and mixed breeds leads to increased breeding using unethical practices. For designer dogs, such as doodles, it is estimated that 90% come from backyard breeders or puppy mills. In these conditions, dogs are not tested for genetic conditions before they are bred, and the puppies that come from these dogs end up with greater health ailments. In addition, the dogs living in these environments are exposed to unsanitary and cramped living conditions, which can spread viruses that are deadly to puppies. Furthermore, dogs that live in these conditions may not have enough socialization with humans or other animals, which can lead to behavior issues. However, because these dogs are popular, they are more likely to be adopted at shelters and are more likely to be rescued by organizations that can provide behavioral training and medical care to address these issues. This can reinforce the positive stereotypes about popular breeds and further prevent other dog breeds from being considered. To avoid confirmation bias, certain research practices should be implemented. One strategy to combat confirmation bias includes considering the opposite. Specifically, research found that participants that were told to consider the same methodology produced the opposite conclusion had less confirmation bias than participants that were simply told to be as unbiased as possible. Furthermore, the experiment also showed that individuals that were exposed to materials that made opposite possibilities more noticeable had less confirmation bias than participants that were simply told to be as unbiased as possible. In the context of the research process specific to breed selection, this would translate to seeking evidence that a specific breed is not a particular characteristic. For instance, searching for evidence that golden retrievers are not the friendliest dog breed or that pit bulls are not the most aggressive dogs. Another tactic to avoid confirmation bias is to visit an animal shelter or animal rescue in person to see what the dogs are like. This allows the individual to choose a dog based on the dog's behavior, which maximizes compatibility and increases the chances for less popular dog breeds to be considered. However, when visiting a dog at a shelter or a rescue, the halo effect can occur. The halo effect is a cognitive bias where a positive impression in one area leads to positive impressions in other unrelated areas. For instance, research indicates that men that had more muscle were perceived as better leaders, and similarly, women that are perceived as more attractive are associated with traits such as warmth, understanding, compassion, sympathy, and gentleness. Research tested the halo effect respective to the baby schema, a set of facial features that include a large head, a round face, large eyes, a small nose, and a small mouth, and found that these features in infants lead to caregiving tendencies. Later research indicates that animals that display the baby schema are perceived as cute, and that the human gaze is fixated on these animals for a longer period of time. Similar to the way that the halo effect is seen in humans that are perceived as attractive. Thorne et al. Showed that perceived level of a dog's cuteness influenced the rating of friendliness and warmth. Specifically, dogs that had higher cuteness ratings received higher ratings of friendliness and warmth. These findings can be seen as translating over to the adoption process. Humans are more likely to gaze at dogs that fit the baby schema at shelters and rescues, and perceive these dogs as cute. By association, people assume that these dogs are warm and friendly, which are fundamental characteristics that people look for when determining which dogs to adopt. In turn, dogs that fit the baby schema are more likely to get adopted than dogs that do not fit the baby schema. The halo effect can be harmful to both dogs and humans. If a dog fits the baby schema and is perceived as having positive qualities that it does not actually have or does not score high on, then the dog may not be compatible with its new owner. Not only can this lead to owner dissatisfaction, but can further lead to the dog being returned to the shelter or rescue. At overcrowded shelters, dogs that are returned are at the top of the euthanasia list and are more likely to be euthanized. However, the halo effect does not only impact the dog that was adopted, the halo effect also contributes to the statistic as to why it takes pit bulls 3 times longer to get adopted than other dogs. That is, although pit bulls have wider heads compared to other dogs, making their skull shape rounder, which fits the baby schema. Their eyes look smaller because of this. Research found that humans tend to focus on the eyes of a creature first before looking at other facial features. Participants viewed images of people, humanoids with eyes located in the middle of the face, and monsters with eyes positioned in locations different than both humans and humanoids. Regardless of where the eyes were placed, humans looked at the eyes early and more often compared to other parts of the face. If people are more focused on the eyes as opposed to other facial features, this can make pit bulls look more intimidating compared to other dogs that have a skinnier head shape but appear to have larger eyes. However, just because a pit bull may look more intimidating than other dogs, it is not a reflection of their behavior. It is important to choose a dog based on compatibility. Research indicates that the halo effect is the result of intuitive thinking, an information processing system that is automatic and associative. In order to reduce the halo effect, research suggests that analytic thinking might be the key. Analytic thinking prior to the exposure of adoptable dogs can promote this processing style when exposure occurs. Initiating this processing style before exposure can include being mindful of particular behaviors or characteristics that are necessary for the dog to have, and recognizing that these behaviors and characteristics are separate. That is, they do not predict other behaviors or characteristics. Similarly, if a dog has other characteristics or behaviors that are not as desirable, it does not influence the positive characteristics or behaviors that were previously seen. Despite overcoming the halo effect, the fundamental attribution error can occur. The fundamental attribution error is the tendency to under-attribute the cause of behavior and over-attribute it to dispositional traits, which are stable internal states. At shelters, dogs often depict behaviors that are particular to their environment. Dogs that do not receive enough physical or mental stimulation may bark, and people may attribute the behavior to the dog's personality, that the dog is noisy, reactive, or unfriendly. Other dogs may cower in the corner and not interact with those that walk through the door, indicating that the dog is uninterested, unfriendly, or shy. However, cowering behavior could be the result of other dogs barking at the shelter, or recently being placed at the shelter and therefore being in a new environment. It could also be a form of learned helplessness. Dogs that do not receive attention despite moving to the front of the cage and attempting to interact with humans learn that doing so does not lead to human interaction. As a result, the dog stopped doing so. One method to reduce the fundamental attribution error is perspective taking. Looking at a situation from a dog's point of view, particularly in the context of how the dog might perceive the current environment, can decrease the attribution of current behaviors to dispositional traits.